Cassius Clay had fought 37 times in Louisville gyms and church basements, had won trophies that lined his bedroom shelf, had heard the cheers of neighbors who knew his name and record by heart. But the ticket in his palm was different. Chicago, February 1958. The Golden Gloves. The boy was 15 years old, and the world he knew stopped at the edge of Jefferson County. Everything beyond that was rumor and radio static. He folded the ticket and slid it into his wool coat pocket. His fingers were steady, but something deeper was not. He carried one small canvas bag with his gloves wrapped in newspaper and a thermos his mother had filled that morning. She had kissed his forehead and told him to keep his hands up. His father had gripped his shoulder and said the world was bigger than their street, but not kinder. Cassius nodded as if he understood. He did not yet. Joe Martin had given him the instructions 2 weeks earlier in the Columbia gym basement. Win or lose, you represent something now. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects, and Martin's face looked older than usual, creased with something the boy could not name. It was the look of a man watching someone step off a ledge he himself had stood on long ago, knowing there was no way to tell them what the fall would feel like. But in Cassius's chest, his heart was already running laps he had not yet started. The train lurched forward at 6:17, and Louisville began to slide past the window in shades of brown and gray and pale winter light. Cassius pressed his forehead against the cold glass and watched the skeletal trees bend in the wind, the rows of shotgun houses with smoke rising from chimneys, the streets where he had walked 1,000 times. He had been on a train once before to visit his grandmother in Lexington, but that was only an hour and felt like visiting another room in the same house. This was different. The rails stretched north into states he had only seen on maps in school. Indiana, Illinois, Chicago. The word itself sounded hard and metallic, like the clang of a bell before a round begins. He pulled the ticket from his pocket and read his name printed at the bottom. Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr. It looked official. It looked like proof of something. But proof of what, he could not yet say. Across the aisle, a man in a fedora read a newspaper. A woman 2 rows ahead rocked a baby that would not stop fussing. The train car smelled of cigarette smoke and damp wool, and something sweet he could not identify. Cassius closed his eyes and tried to picture the gym in Chicago. More fighters, more lights, more eyes watching every move, more everything. In his mind, he saw himself moving the way Martin had trained him. Jab, move, jab, pivot, control the center, make them chase you. He had heard those words so many times they played in his head like a song. But there was another voice, too, quieter and less certain, that whispered questions he did not want to answer. What if they are faster? What if Louisville was easy and Chicago is the real test? He did not know it yet, but that small piece of paper in his pocket was the first border he would ever cross entirely on his own. The train moved through the afternoon. Cassius ate the sandwich his mother had packed and drank half the thermos. He watched farmland turn into small towns, then something denser. By the time the sun began to sink, the landscape had changed completely. Factories with smokestacks, rows of houses pressed together. The conductor's voice announced Chicago. Cassius sat up straighter. When the train stopped with a long hiss, the sound felt like a warning. Union Station in Chicago was vast and echoing, with ceilings so high they seemed to belong to a cathedral. People moved in rivers, shoes clicking on marble floors. Cassius stepped onto the platform and felt the cold air hit his face. He had never seen so many people, voices in languages he did not recognize. He stood near a pillar, gripping his bag. A porter walked past. A woman with red lipstick brushed by. In Louisville, people knew his face. Here, he was invisible. It was both frightening and freeing. He checked the address Joe Martin had written and started walking. The city swallowed him whole. The streets were louder than anything he had imagined. Cars honking, vendors shouting, an elevated train rattling overhead. Buildings rose like canyon walls, blocking the light. Cassius walked 3 blocks the wrong direction before stopping to ask. A newspaper vendor pointed without speaking. The boy thanked him and kept walking. His father's words echoed. The world was bigger, that much was true. The gym was in a brick building on the south side, marked only by a faded sign above a metal door. Cassius pushed the door open and stepped into a wave of heat and sound. The smell hit him first. Sweat, leather, liniment, cigarette smoke, all mixed together into something thick and familiar. Then the noise, the thud of gloves on heavy bags, the skip of jump ropes on concrete, the shouts of trainers barking instructions, the bell ringing every 3 minutes. It was the Columbia Gym, only louder, faster, more crowded, more intense. Cassius stood in the doorway and scanned the room. At least 30 fighters, maybe more, all moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you belong in a place like this. Some were older, some were his age. Some looked like grown men. A few glanced his way. Most did not. He tightened his grip on his bag and walked to a gray-haired man at a folding table with a clipboard. The man looked up, asked his name without smiling, checked the list, and pointed to a locker room in the back. Cassius nodded and walked. No one welcomed him. No one asked where he was from. He had not come to make friends. He found an empty bench and set down his bag. His hands were shaking slightly, and he pressed them against his thighs until they stopped. He unwrapped his gloves from the newspaper and laid them on the bench like tools he was preparing to use. They were worn but clean, the leather soft from years of use. He stared at them for a long moment. In Louisville, these gloves had made him a champion. In Chicago, they were just gloves. He laced them slowly, pulling each string tight, feeling the familiar weight settle onto his hands. It was a ritual now, something that calmed his mind and sharpened his focus. When he stood, he felt taller. He walked to an open, heavy bag in the corner. He did not wait for permission. He started hitting. The rhythm came back quickly. Jab, jab, right hand, move. His body remembered. He worked for 30 minutes, rested, then worked again. By evening, his shirt was soaked, and his shoulders ached in the good way. A tall fighter across the room nodded once. Cassius nodded back. It was the first acknowledgement he had received all day. That night, he stayed in a boarding house 6 blocks away. The room was small and cold, with a window facing an alley. Cassius lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the city through the walls. Cars, voices arguing, a distant siren. In Louisville, nights were quiet. Here, the city never stopped. He thought about home, about his brother Rudy, about the trophies on the shelf. He thought about the gym and fighters who moved like they were born in the ring. He thought about the tournament in 2 days, about stepping into a ring where no one knew his name. It was terrifying. It was exactly what he wanted. The tournament began Friday night in a converted warehouse with folding chairs and harsh overhead lights. Cassius sat in the locker room with other fighters, all quiet, wrapped in their own thoughts. A man called Names. His name came in the third match. He followed a hallway toward growing crowd noise. When he stepped into the light, it hit him like a wave. He climbed into the ring. Across from him, a white kid with a crew cut bounced on his toes. The referee called them center. The bell rang. The first punch was faster than anything Cassius expected. It snapped his head to the side. He stepped back, circled. The crowd became a blur. His opponent threw sharp combinations. Cassius blocked most, but a few landed. His heart pounded. Doubt crept in. This was not Louisville. But then his body remembered. Jab. Move. Jab. Pivot. He found his rhythm. His footwork smoothed. His punches landed clean. By round's end, his opponent was breathing harder. The second round was different. He controlled the center now, made his opponent miss, made him chase, made him tired. The third round began. Cassius moved like water. When the final bell rang, the referee raised his hand. The crowd erupted. Cassius nodded once and walked back. He won his next 2 fights. Each one harder. Each opponent faster. Stronger. More experienced. But each time, Cassius found a way. By the final match, he was exhausted. Ribs aching, knuckles swollen. But he climbed into the ring one more time. His opponent was a kid from Detroit, taller and heavier. The bell rang. Cassius fought with everything he had. But he did not win. The referee raised the other kid's hand. Cassius stood in the corner and watched. He did not cry. He did not protest. He nodded, shook his opponent's hand, and climbed out. In the locker room, he stared at his gloves for a long time. He had come to Chicago, a champion from Louisville. He was leaving as a boy who had just learned how much he did not know. The train ride home was quieter. Cassius sat in the same kind of seat, staring out the same kind of window, but everything looked different. He thought about the fights, the wins, the loss. He thought about the moment the referee had raised the other kid's hand, how it felt like the world telling him he was not ready. But beneath that feeling was something harder and more certain. He was not ready yet. But he would be. Chicago had shown him the distance between where he was and where he needed to go. That distance was not a wall. It was a road. When the train pulled into Union Station, the sun was setting. Cassius stepped onto the platform and saw his father waiting. Their eyes met. His father did not ask if he won. He asked if he learned. Cassius nodded. They walked home in silence, the kind that carries more weight than words. That night he placed his gloves on the shelf next to the trophies. They looked different now. Not better, not worse, just different. He lay in bed listening to his brother breathe. Outside, the street was quiet. The world felt small again, but only for a moment. Because now Cassius knew what lay beyond the edge of his city. He knew what it took to stand in a ring where no one knew your name and still find a way to fight. And he knew, with a certainty that felt like steel in his chest, that he would go back. Not just to Chicago, but to every city, every ring, every fight that stood between him and the man he was determined to become. The lesson Chicago taught him was simple. The world does not care what you did yesterday. It only cares what you can do today. And for a 15-year-old boy from Louisville, that lesson was the first real punch he ever took that did not come from a glove. It came from the city itself, from the noise and the lights and the cold truth of a raised hand that was not his own. But like every punch he would take in the years to come, Cassius Clay learned to absorb it, to study it, to let it make him stronger. Because that is what champions do. They do not avoid the fight. They step into it. They learn from it. And they come back better than they were before. Chicago was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything.